Good morning. It's Sunday. Today is actually my dad's birthday, and I'm speaking today at church on freedom. It's what I've been living in for the last 7.5 years. I have a tattoo that says Gia Elefthria, which means for freedom, which is the first two words from Galatians 5:1. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free, right? So my heart, I've been thinking about freedom, and I used to focus on freedom, but now I don't focus on freedom as much. I believe that freedom is the fruit of the love of God. And so when we're rooted down in the love of God and we know His love for us, that's when we become free. We might be in bondage to something, as I was to a lot of different things, and guys that come in our group are in bondage to different things in their life, but at the root of that is self. The root of that is the brokenness of what's happened in their life up to this point, so they go deeper and deeper into self, and we mask it with different things in our life. We go to drugs or alcohol or pornography or whatever to comfort us a little bit in that moment. And that's where Patrick Carnes, a leading addiction expert, says that the root of all behavioral addiction is feeling unloved and unlovable. So there's something underneath that. But the beautiful thing happens, freedom happens, is when we come to the end of ourselves. That's why Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, you must deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me. The one who tries to hold on to his life will lose it, but the one who lays down his life for my sake and the gospel will find it. And that's where the beauty happens, is when, because I wasn't created to live a life centered in self, and yet because of the fall, that's where I am. That's where everybody is. But the beautiful thing, the fruit happens when we come to that place. So each guy that comes through that door, I want to help them to break free from that brokenness of the cycle of addiction in their life. I want them to have their marriage restored. I want that man to not be in bondage to pornography or not be in bondage to drugs or alcohol. I want him to walk in freedom. And how we get there, it's it being in Christ. It's in Him that we're going to find that fulfillment. In Him we're going to find that freedom, right? So it's laying down of that self-life and then becoming that new creation, understanding God's love for you. He desires the absolute best for you, and yet we settle for something less. You know, Ryan had a post, and it was about law and grace. And I was thinking about conviction. A couple months ago, God just made it so clear to me that what conviction is, guilt, shame, and self-condemnation comes from the enemy. It doesn't come from God. Conviction is God's way of loving us and saying, look, you're supposed to get your fulfillment in me, and yet you're running to this instead. It's God's love for us, just like as a parent saying, I don't want you, son, to stick that fork in that light socket. It's going to hurt you. It's coming from a place of love from a father, and yet we have that free will to go stick that fork in the socket. And that's what we do when we're living a life in bondage to sin. But He wants us to live in freedom. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Stand firm then, and do not commit again to a yoke of slavery. We tend to go back into bondage. We're meant to live in harmony and shalom with God. He loves us and desires the absolute best for us. And yet we can choose to either live a life centered in self or in Him. So the idea is freedom is the fruit and the gift of God when we come to Him and say, I'm yours. And that's what happened 7.5 years ago for me, is just coming to that place of saying, God, I don't know what this is going to look like. I'm not going to try and incorporate you into my life to make my life better. I'm just going to surrender my life to you. It says in AA, we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. That's awesome, but then actually doing it is where we experience the fruit of that. Right? We made that decision. Now it's just saying, God, I'm yours, and then living out from that place forward. You know what I'm saying? Instead of living a life centered in myself. Because first 44 years, even in church, I lived my life centered in self. But the freedom and peace and the joy and the love and the contentment and the freedom to be able to love others unconditionally came from me laying down of the self-life. And that's where you're going to find freedom. And that's what our group does. It's a gospel community of people broken coming in and then becoming more and more free as we go along, because all of a sudden we see our created value. We see the beauty of the cross. We see the beauty of his unconditional love coming our way, right? It brought him joy in going to the cross on our behalf because he saw our value. That is being loved by God. Beloved love. When you understand God's love for you, it sets you free to love others unconditionally. Anyway, God bless you all. I hope you have an amazing, free Sunday. God bless.